Welcome to this week's edition of Talk Back. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Nesbit, and with me is Justin Gay, your host and director of content. Justin, there is yellow flags all over the studio here. Many of them are for the games this past weekend in the NFL. And I think there might even be a few yellow flags here with LeBron James' name on them. We've got a huge episode here in episode 308. A lot of NFL to cover, certainly those referees and what they are doing to the game of football that we love on Sunday afternoons to just sit down, watch some hard-hitting action, contests going back and forth that, Justin, right now, it doesn't seem like we can get 2 or 3 minutes of game action before it's stopping. It's changing the dynamics of the game and potentially even who wins and who loses. We'll talk about some of the teams on the rise and some of the teams that were on the rise that are now moving toward the basement. And yes, I alluded to it a minute ago, LeBron James, we got to throw the yellow on him. Then we'll hit overtime, a hot topic out of the NASCAR Monster Energy Series that, Justin, I need to rant about here this week after the race at Talladega. We've got all of that in episode 308 right after this. Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show. All right, it's time to talk a little Week 6 NFL action. And, Eric, we can't really talk about any teams yet because we have to talk about what an embarrassing week of NFL officiating it really was. And it took center stage Monday night. I don't know if you, like me, had any money on the Lions, but you probably weren't very happy with the officiating. Luckily, I didn't have that much, so it really didn't bother me. But the two calls in that game that really changed the course of the game highlights what we have been seeing all year and even back last year to that Rams-Saints game where officiating is not just making mistakes in games, Eric. They're actually making mistakes that are costing teams games now at this point.
Right.
The Lions didn't even get a chance to make a comeback in that game with that penalty. They couldn't even give up the touchdown. The Packers actually, Williams made the decision just to sit down, run the clock out, and then Mason Crosby celebrated a 23-yard field goal like he kicked it from 70. I know everybody likes to use the adage, oh, you have to overcome the refs. You have to make plays throughout the game, this and that. But the Lions had played that game pretty well up until that point. They were terrible in the red zone, but you can't overcome a call on a third down that gives an automatic first down in that position. So where are we at now with the NFL? What does the league need to do at this point, Eric? Because this is a serious, serious problem.
Well, the rant that Booger McFarland went on at the end of the telecast on Monday night, as much as people like to rag on him and talk about whether or not he's good for Monday Night Football, I got to give him a lot of credit because he really went on a little bit of a tirade there at the end of the telecast, and he's right.
He didn't hold back.
He didn't hold back, and he was right. The Lions were basically stripped of the chance to win that game. And here this week, the NFL comes out and says, yeah, one of those two calls was incorrect. And the thing I have a problem with in football, you see it with the pass interference calls and the fact that it's a spot foul. You know, some of these calls that are 10 and 15-yard penalties, the personal fouls, things that, you know, really can change field position very rapidly. Look, I almost had the same issue in the Jets game when 6 penalties in a row were called on that final drive as Dallas is trying to come back and win that game. There were 6 flags in a row on that final drive. I was about to lose my mind if the Jets ended up losing that game because of all of that action with the yellow laundry all over the field. But Justin, here in this game, as you talked about, the Lions were basically given a humongous penalty that cost them not only field position, but gave the Packers the ability to keep the drive going. And then I'm sure a lot of fantasy players and even bettors weren't happy with Williams doing the right thing and the smart thing, which was to lay down before the goal line. But all in all, the referees had a hand in changing the outcome of that game. And the reason it's different than balls and strikes or a foul call in basketball, in football, the field position and the yardage and what you have to lose or gain is so dramatic sometimes. I feel like this is an issue that really must be addressed. You talked about it there with the Saints and the Rams. You're taking basically 6 points off the board by getting that call wrong. Justin, you're not mistaken. There is on average 15 flags per game, which is up almost 2 flags per game since just last season when fans were already upset. And now we're already 2 flags above that. Not to mention you're getting those stoppages, but then you're also getting the additional reviews. The reviews aren't helping either. You're going to that booth review, as we saw in that highlighted moment with the Giants and Patriots last week. And I know you and I tweeted and texted about this, the fact that you have a bad call. It's clearly a bad call. Then it goes to the review and they still uphold the call, even though now 20 million, 30 million people have seen it in slow motion. It's so egregious at this point, Justin, that I don't know how the NFL can really deal with this without some sort of a major, I hate to use the word investigation with everything that happens politically with all these investigations over, we're investigating investigators at this point. But Justin, there has to be an investigation of the officiating crews and how we can come to a better sense of running these football games so that it's just not constantly stopped, constantly reviewed, and then ultimately constantly wrong.
Eric, they have more technology now to be able, not only, I'm not even talking about in game. They have all this technology to be able to help them with these calls and their training throughout the week. And the officiating seems to be getting worse year after year, game after game, week after week. And this whole notion of there was a mistake in the Rams Saints game, so we're now going to make offensive or defensive pass interference challengeable. But they'd never overturn them. I think it's like, what, 1 out of the last 21 that have been overturned. So now coaches are not throwing the challenge flag because they know they're just going to lose a timeout and lose a challenge. It's ridiculous. There was a call in that Giants-Patriots game. It was clear pass interference. He wraps the guy up with both hands and tackles him before the ball gets there, and they wouldn't overturn it. So even when the league is going to change certain things, like I think the one thing they should do is inside of 2 minutes to go, any penalty that is an automatic first down is something that can be looked at or reviewed, and it can be done in a quick manner. There's somebody in New York, somebody at the game that should be able to look at the TV and say, okay, Flowers is grabbing at the shoulder pads. He's not into his neck. He's not into the head or neck area. Pick that flag up. It should take 15 seconds because as soon as you saw the first replay, Booger was actually all over that one where he's like, that's not a penalty. A referee or somebody watching that, Eric, should be able to make that call. Look, Denver had it earlier this year. Inside of 2 minutes to go in the game, that roughing the passer call on Bradley Chubb, that has hurt their season. They could easily right now be sitting at 3-3. They're now at 2-4. You're seeing the Lions go through the same thing at this point. But the problem is, Eric, it's like they don't want to overturn their own wrong calls to make themselves look bad. But then it looks even worse because it's like, okay, you screwed this up in real time and now you've screwed it up on the replay and you won't change it. So basically, the PI call is a break glass in case of emergency situation that if there is something absolutely egregious that they blow, they have a chance to fix it so it doesn't manifest itself like what happened in that game. And that's not right. It's either pass interference or it's not, Eric. For some reason, they can't get it right. We've talked about this now for a few years and doing the show ever since gaming and gambling and sports betting is getting into more and more states. It's on the mobile apps. The more people that you have that are gambling, the more this stuff that is completely egregious, it's like, okay, are you guys completely incompetent? Or are you the F word that everybody hates? And no, it's not the one I can't say, the fix. Is there something that's out there? There's already underground tweets that are out there and texts and articles of some bettor that keeps putting money now for, I believe, 4 games in a row, big money on games that Clete Blakeman's crew is reffing. And that was the crew that had this Monday night game. So when you have these things that are unexplainable of how you guys keep missing the same calls and there's no answer for it, that stuff is going to start coming up. Controversy is going to start coming up, or conspiracy is going to start to come up, where that's the only way to explain some of these things. Because if not, the only other way to explain it is you have people that are getting paid very good salaries that are completely incompetent to do this, Eric.
Yeah.
So, and neither one of them is a good situation for the league. Either your referees could be fixing games or they're completely incompetent. Neither one is where I don't think.
Well,
the
later
wants.
in the first segment here, we're going to talk about the Chiefs, but this past weekend was a fantastic football game, or what should have been a fantastic football game between two of the best young quarterbacks in the league, Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes, as in that Chiefs-Texans game. But here's the problem. It's all about the officiating. Once again, I couldn't believe this stat when I looked at it and read through it, that these teams were combined 21 penalties for 149 yards. But Justin, that's not the damning part. The damning part is that the officials called an additional 12 penalties that were either declined, overruled, or offsetting. So that means there were 33 penalty flags in that game. And this is the highlight of your week. Ridiculous. This is the young superstar quarterbacks. This is a moment where you want the game to shine, and they stopped that game 33 times for flags. Unbelievable to me. Speaking of conspiracy theories, there's some Chiefs fans that were none too happy about some of the calls, and I've tried to find it on YouTube and stuff, but there are some clips of the referees, maybe one making a call, then they huddle together, and then someone goes to their, puts their hand to their ear as if they're getting information from who knows where, above somewhere, and then all of a sudden, oh, well, the call is reversed, or the call is against this team. I don't understand what's happening. These guys make on average $200,000 per season, according to the recent officiating agreement with the NFL. That's unacceptable. I mean, look, if you're going to have a job where you make $200,000, you've got to be right more than you're wrong. And I think right now they're getting too many things wrong, and it's just magnified.
At this point, Eric, I wouldn't even care if somebody was talking to them in their ear if they could actually get the calls right. So I don't know who's talking to them, but they're not really helping them. And it's a mess. You brought up the Cowboys-Jets game. That last drive, 6 straight plays with a penalty. It just killed the momentum. But Eric, let's take it now to the field and actually talk about some teams, because the Cowboys went into MetLife and lost to your Jets. And I don't think anybody saw that coming. I will say this. The one thing that my brother and I were talking about, games that were good games to throw in a teaser parlay. And I didn't feel that great about Dallas. The one thing I told him was, look, we haven't seen Sam Darnold since week 1, and the Jets were up on Buffalo, who a lot of people are on now. They were up in that game 16-0 before they kind of fell apart. So I don't think there's enough out there to really know what to expect with Sam Darnold. And Eric, I think the Cowboys came in and they were thinking this was the Jets team that Luke Falk was running, and not the team with Sam Darnold, because watching that game, Dallas was completely flat in the first half. Defensively now, they're a mess. Amari Cooper is now banged up with the quad injury. Eric, Cowboys looked great, but again, we talked about it last week, really not the greatest competition through the first 3 weeks. Now they've played 3 better teams. They've lost all 3 of them. They've got the Eagles coming in on prime time. So what does Dallas do now with this free fall, and who is really to blame? Because obviously everybody points the finger at Jason Garrett. Should he be taking the blame for this, or is there somewhere else you're looking at?
I can't put all the blame on Jason Garrett. I think I want to address a few of the points that you just made there, because there's a couple of different ways to look at it. Number one, and you've hit on it, and I think you're 100% correct. We now have a bigger sample size. 6 games. We live in a knee-jerk reaction society. We do. That's the way that Twitter is, and that's the way the media is. That's the way the culture is. And obviously when Dallas goes out and pounds the Giants, and Eli looks terrible in week 1, and then they take care of another interdivision rival with the Redskins, and then absolutely lay one on Miami, which no one was surprised at that point. They're 3-0. But now that we're 6 games into the season, we just saw the Redskins and the Dolphins playing a game to see who would win their first game of the year. And the other one still doesn't have a win. And we'll talk about that briefly in a moment, but all of a sudden makes those wins a couple of weeks ago for the Cowboys not seem so impressive. Meanwhile, Eli was also benched for the Giants. So those 3 wins are really not standing as well. They don't stand the test of time now. And as you said, the Jets, they just aren't the same team last week that they were the first couple of weeks after Darnold's mono diagnosis. I think what you saw is what I thought I saw when we did our preview shows. is that the Jets really were supposed to be a much better team than 0-4. And I think they really are a better team than 0-4. And Dallas ran up against them.